Hey guys, tonight we sink into the oldest dream Greece ever told. Its beginning, or maybe its beginning of beginnings. Picture nothingness, not even darkness, just a vast, yawning gap the Greeks called chaos. You float there, feeling both uneasy and strangely calm, because there's no up, no down, not even the faint hum of a fan in the corner. And yet, out of this silence, things begin to stir. You probably won't survive this first moment, but hey, that's the fun of mythology, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I always imagine someone in Los Angeles dozing off while someone in Delhi is just winding down after dinner. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Section 1. From Chaos to Cosmos, Creation Myths, Primordial Beings, and the Birth of Order. From chaos came Gaia, the earth herself, broad-hipped and unshakable, the mother who gives everything. Next came Tartarus, the deep abyss, a place so far below the earth you'd think falling into it would take longer than your last boring Zoom call. And then Eros. Scholars still argue whether this myth hints at an early attempt to explain natural science, or whether it was simply a bedtime story ancient parents whispered to keep kids quiet as the fire burned low. And yet, even here at the dawn, there's trouble. Uranus doesn't exactly win Father of the Year. He fears his children, the Cyclopes with their single blazing eyes, the 100-handed Hecatoncheires whose limbs could crush mountains. So he stuffs them back inside Gaia, burying them deep. Imagine the earth groaning under the weight of her own children. Quirky detail, some old fragments describe Gaia making actual sounds, like moans or thunderclaps, every time Uranus pressed them down. Not the lullaby you'd want before drifting off. Gaia's pain boils into fury. She fashions a great sickle of flint, sharp enough to shear the sky. She turns to her children, begging them to rise. All hesitate, except Cronus, the youngest Titan, ambitious and cunning. With Gaia's blade, Cronus ambushes his father. The moment is grim, but oddly comic. Cronus leaps up, slices Uranus, and tosses the severed, well, let's just say the bloody fragments into the sea. From that foam rises Aphrodite, goddess of love, reminding you how bizarrely Greek myths mix horror and beauty. Now, with Uranus cast aside, the Titans rule. Night still falls as Nyx wanders, weaving dreams and nightmares alike. Day bursts forth with Hemera, the bright daughter of night. The world grows populated with abstract forces: Thanatos, death; Hypnos, sleep; Nemesis, revenge. It's like a whole family tree of moods and conditions, each given a face and a story. And when you pause to think about it, you realize the Greeks didn't need superheroes. They already lived surrounded by gods of every passing feeling. As you drift, you notice how myth refuses to settle. Creation keeps unfolding, layer upon layer. First chaos, then Gaia and Uranus, then Titans. It's as if the Greeks could never stop asking, but what came before that? The same way you keep scrolling through your phone long after you promised yourself you'd sleep. And here's a historical fact to anchor you. Early Greek poets, like Hesiod, wrote these myths down around the 8th century BCE, but the stories themselves are far older, carried in oral tradition for centuries. Imagine shepherds on windswept hillsides, staring at the stars, whispering about chaos and Gaia, long before Athens even had walls. So you float there, halfway between sleep and wake, watching the first gods stride across the stage. Power struggles brew, revenge simmers, and the next chapter looms, the rise of the Titans and the uneasy reign that will set the stage for everything else. 2. Rise of the Titans. Cronus, Rhea, and the uneasy reign of the Titans. You drift further into this mythic haze, and the scene shifts. The Titans, children of Gaia and Uranus, now stretch tall and wide across the world like colossal shadows frozen in twilight. Cronus, the new king, sharp and calculating, sits smug on his makeshift throne. His siblings gather around him. Oceanus with his endless streams, Hyperion blazing with sunlight, Themis holding the weight of law, and Rhea, soft yet steadfast, who will one day play her own cunning part. For now, though, they're the new bosses. But power in mythology never comes without paranoia. Cronus, despite being the youngest, is already suspicious. His father's final words echo that one of his own children would overthrow him. And like a badly written corporate succession plan, Cronus decides to make sure no heir survives to challenge him. His method? Well, not exactly subtle. Every time Rhea gives birth, Cronus swallows the baby whole. Gulp. Hestia disappears. Gulp. Demeter. Gone. Gulp. Hera, swallowed with barely a hiccup. You imagine this horrifyingly comical sight, a titan burping like he just downed a buffet. Rhea suffers silently at first, clutching her infants only to watch them vanish into her husband's cavernous stomach. But sorrow turns to defiance. By the time she gives birth to her sixth child, she hatches a plan. On a night thick with storm clouds, she hides the newborn in a cave on Crete. There, nurses tend him, and nymphs dance to drown his cries. Instead of the child, she hands Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, and the fool swallows it without a second thought. You almost want to laugh, but also wince at the absurdity. A god chugging rocks like candy. That hidden baby, of course, is Zeus. You can almost hear the drum roll, because the myth has been building to this. The little god grows in secret, feeding on honey. When Amalthea's horn breaks off, it becomes the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, forever gushing food and drink. Imagine your fridge refilling itself every time you open it. Scholars still argue whether this goat imagery came from an earlier local fertility cult, or whether the Greeks just really liked telling stories about livestock. Meanwhile, Cronus rules in his uneasy peace. The world is ordered but stiff. Like a kingdom built on fear, you walk through these landscapes in your mind. Rivers curling like silver ribbons, mountains sharp against the horizon, gods watching but not daring to move. The swallowed children live inside Cronus, trapped yet still alive, an image that feels claustrophobic and strangely dreamlike. Zeus eventually grows bold enough to act. Guided by Metis, the goddess of clever counsel, he brews a potion and tricks Cronus into drinking it. Suddenly the Titan gags, heaves, and in a grotesque reversal, vomits up each of his children. They emerge fully grown, radiant and furious. Hestia, Hera, Demeter, Hades, Poseidon, all spit back into existence and instantly allied with Zeus. The rebellion has begun, and so the great Titanomachy erupts, the war between the older Titans and the younger Olympians. Imagine the sky torn apart by lightning, the seas boiling under Poseidon's wrath, the earth trembling with each stomp of a Titan's foot. The Cyclopes, freed from their prison, craft weapons for the gods. Thunderbolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helm of invisibility for Hades. Suddenly the odds tilt. But it's not just brute force, it's a battle of generations. You feel the tension of old order versus new, fathers clashing with sons, tradition against change. Historically, some think this myth reflected real memories of Greek tribes overthrowing earlier cultures. Scholars still argue whether the Titanomachy was a poetic metaphor for cultural shifts or just an excuse to imagine gods throwing fireballs at each other. Either way, it's cinematic in your mind. Cronus and his allies fall. One by one, the Titans are chained and hurled into Tartarus, that endless pit, their roars echoing through the abyss. Zeus and his siblings rise victorious, draping themselves in new power. The age of the Olympians has dawned. Yet even here there's an unease. Myth never lets peace last for long. As you drift on, you picture Zeus standing tall, thunderbolt in hand, his siblings by his side. They've toppled one regime, but they've also inherited the same prophecy that haunted their father. Power is never secure, not even for gods, and in the distance, beyond the clouds, darker threats are already stirring. 3. Olympians claim the throne, Zeus and siblings overthrowing Cronus, reshaping divine rule. You linger in the silence after the Titanomachy, the dust still hanging thick in the mythic air. The Olympians, fresh from their victory, look around at the shattered world and realize, oh no, someone has to actually run this place. It's one thing to win a cosmic war, it's another to manage a divine empire. And so the siblings sit together and start dividing responsibilities. Like roommates awkwardly deciding who does the dishes. Zeus, of course, claims the sky. You imagine him with his lightning bolt, standing atop Olympus, smug as ever. Thunder booming like a self-made applause track. Poseidon gets the sea, his trident gleaming as waves curl in deference. Hades takes the underworld, a grim but necessary realm. And honestly, he probably breathes a sigh of relief at not having to deal with the chaos above. Hera becomes queen of the gods, presiding with sharp eyes and sharper words. Hestia guards the hearth, the fire at the center of every home. And Demeter? She holds sway over the harvest, ensuring fields bloom and bread exists on tables. This divine reorganization feels neat, but of course, Greek mythology loves to complicate things. No sooner do they set up camp on Mount Olympus than new threats rise from the shadows. You step carefully into one of the most terrifying sights, Typhon. Born of Gaia's rage and Tartarus's darkness, this monstrous giant towers over mountains, a body writhing with serpents, eyes blazing fire, wings stretching wide enough to blot the sky. You shiver, imagining him, a nightmare stitched together from every possible fear. Zeus faces Typhon head-on. The battle shakes the cosmos. Thunder cracks, volcanoes spew molten rage, and seas crash against the land. For a moment, it seems the gods themselves will be unmade. In some versions, Typhon even manages to wound Zeus, tearing out his sinews. Yes, his literal sinews, like ripping out the strings of a puppet. Hermes, ever clever, steals them back, and Zeus recovers, roaring back into the fray. Eventually, Typhon is cast down, trapped beneath Mount Etna, his fury manifesting in every eruption. Scholars still argue whether this myth was the Greeks trying to explain volcanic activity or just indulging in pure apocalyptic spectacle. Yet for all this cosmic chaos, there's also a strangely human side to these stories. The gods bicker, love, cheat, and sulk like an overdramatic royal family. Zeus especially develops a reputation for his endless affairs. Every few steps in this mythic journey, you stumble upon another of his escapades, turning into a swan, a bull, a shower of golden rain, basically everything except behaving responsibly. Hera, his wife, fumes constantly, her jealousy both terrifying and oddly relatable. Quirky detail? In one myth, Zeus disguises himself as a cuckoo bird to woo Hera. Imagine the king of the gods sitting on a branch, flapping like a tiny bird, shivering pitifully until Hera picks him up. You almost want to laugh, divine romance starting with poultry cosplay. Meanwhile, the Olympians establish their hierarchy. They feast on ambrosia and nectar, lounging in golden halls. You picture them in eternal banquets, reclining, music drifting, laughter echoing. But beneath that glamour lies a restless edge. They've beaten the Titans, but the universe still resists being tamed. Chaos lingers. Mortals begin to stir, and the gods watch with curiosity, sometimes with affection, often with cruelty. You feel the shift. Myth is moving from cosmic battles to stories that brush against human life. The divine order has been set, but it's fragile, buzzing with energy, like a freshly tuned harp waiting to be played. The Olympians are in charge now, yet their drama, their passions, their rivalries will ripple into the mortal world in ways no one can control. And so, standing atop Olympus in your mind, you gaze outward, sensing that humanity is about to step into the story. The gods aren't just rulers of the sky and sea anymore. They're about to become entangled in every village tale, every harvest ritual, every whispered prayer. And you, drifting in this half-dream, are poised to follow. Zeus, Hera, and messy divinity, power games, love affairs, and Hera's jealous vengeance. You feel the story's weight shift again, this time from divine squabbles to something closer, something human. The cosmos has been shaped. The Olympians have taken their thrones. But what about us, the mortals? The myths breathe life into mankind's origins, though not without contradictions. You wander through these overlapping tales, like walking through a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing a slightly different version. In one story, Prometheus, that sly titan with a heart annoyingly bigger than his caution, shapes mankind from clay. He molds figures out of the earth, damp and pliable, while Athena breathes life into them. You picture those first humans blinking awake, confused, probably cold, shivering in a world that didn't yet care about them. Prometheus watches, fond but worried, because unlike the gods, these little beings are fragile. And so comes the great theft, fire. Prometheus dares to steal the flame from Olympus, hiding a spark in a hollow fennel stalk. To mortals, fire is everything: warmth, cooking, light in the darkness. Imagine that first campfire crackling, shadows dancing, humans finally able to chase back the night. Quirky detail? Some versions say Prometheus tricked Zeus twice, once with the fire, once with a rigged offering, where he made bones and fat look tasty, leaving the meat for mankind. Essentially, the first divine prank in history. But Zeus isn't laughing. He retaliates with one of mythology's darkest punishments. Prometheus is chained to a lonely rock, and each day an eagle swoops down, tearing out his liver. Each night it grows back, only to be devoured again at sunrise. You flinch imagining it, the eternal rhythm of pain. Time itself weaponized. Scholars still argue whether Prometheus is a symbol of rebellion against tyranny, or simply a warning that and mortals, they don't escape punishment either. Enter Pandora. Crafted by the gods, she's beautiful, curious, and, let's be honest, deliberately set up to fail. She's handed a jar. Yes, jar. Not box, though later retellings twisted it, and told not to open it. You know where this is going. Curiosity cracks the seal, and out rushes every misery: disease, envy, sorrow, toil. The world darkens. Only hope lingers at the bottom, a tiny flicker stubbornly refusing to leave. You step through these myths, feeling how they explain human existence with both cruelty and comfort. Fire, suffering, hope. They weave together, making the chaos of life just a little less random. And as you drift further, you realize humans aren't just passive in these tales. They're central, constantly interacting with gods, sometimes punished, sometimes blessed, always caught in the messy middle. Mortals begin to fill the landscape of myth. Farmers till soil under Demeter's watchful eye. Sailors pray to Poseidon before braving the seas. Kings claim descent from Zeus, hoping divine legitimacy will silence doubters. It's here that mythology grows roots in everyday life. Every flicker of lightning becomes Zeus's temper, Every bad harvest, Demeter's grief. The world itself transforms into a divine conversation. Oddly enough, these stories also carry traces of ancient memory. Scholars still argue whether Pandora's jar reflects Mesopotamian myths of forbidden knowledge, or whether Prometheus's fire is a faint echo of humanity's real leap forward with technology. Either way, myth and reality blur like overlapping dreams, and in the quiet between these grand stories, you imagine ordinary people sitting around their own fires, retelling them. The shepherd on a lonely hillside, a child leaning closer to the flames, eyes wide, drifting toward sleep as the storyteller explains why the world is both cruel and wondrous. The myths don't just entertain, they soothe, they warn. They give shape to fears that otherwise might have no name. The gods remain distant, yet strangely intimate. They don't just rule the cosmos, they intrude into mortal lives, shaping destinies, stirring chaos, demanding worship. And in this uneasy bond between human fragility and divine power, Greek mythology really begins to find its heartbeat. Athena, Ares, and wisdom versus war. Rivalry between intellect and brute force shaping mortal life. You wander deeper into the landscape of myth, and the air seems to thicken with echoes of battles, quests, and the clamor of heroes rising. Mortals are no longer just passive clay figures or victims of divine whims. They're becoming protagonists. The stage expands, filled with kings, warriors, and tricksters, each carrying a spark of defiance or desperation. One of the earliest tales that grabs your attention is the War of the Gigantomachy, when the earth itself, insulted by Zeus's rule, produces giants to challenge the Olympians. These towering beings, bristling with strength, hurl mountains as weapons, crashing them down like children tossing blocks. The gods, for all their might, struggle until they call on a mortal ally, Heracles. Imagine that, immortals needing a man's bow to tip the scales. And so Heracles, not yet born in our story's timeline but already foreshadowed, ensures victory, piercing giants with arrows tipped in poison. Scholars still argue whether this myth echoes real clashes between ancient tribes or was simply a symbolic warning. Even gods can't stand alone. From here you drift into the age of heroes. It's like the myths shift gear, zooming from cosmic scale into stories closer to the ground, where gods and mortals mingle awkwardly, sometimes lovingly, often disastrously. You meet Perseus, the slayer of Medusa. Picture him sneaking across a moonlit plain, shield polished to a mirror, sword in hand, creeping up on a creature whose gaze can turn flesh into stone. One glance, and statues litter her cave, silent screams etched in marble. Quirky detail? Perseus doesn't just kill Medusa. He carries her head around in a sack, using it like a macabre party trick whenever he needs to petrify someone. Then there's Theseus, striding into the labyrinth with a ball of thread gifted by Ariadne. You imagine the claustrophobic tunnels, the stench of the Minotaur's breath, the scrape of hooves on stone. At the heart, half man, half bull, the beast charges, and Theseus plants his blade deep. But of course, the gods meddle here too. Ariadne, abandoned later by Theseus, is swept up by Dionysus, her heartbreak stitched into divine drama. And then Heracles himself steps forward, that hulking hero doomed to 12 labors. You wander beside him as he wrestles the Nemean lion, strangling its golden hide that no weapon can pierce. Later, he cleans the Augean stables by rerouting an entire river. You can almost hear him grumbling, seriously, chores as punishment. Scholars still argue whether Heracles reflects real folk heroes stitched together over centuries, or if he was always just a symbol of humanity's eternal struggle against chaos. These hero myths pulse with mortal ambition, but they also reveal something else. The gods can't resist interfering. Athena guides Perseus, Poseidon curses Theseus, Hera torments Heracles. The divine and human worlds overlap so much, you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Every heroic feat feels both earned and manipulated, a collaboration between bravery and divine meddling. And beyond the glory, you notice the tragedies. Heroes rarely retire in peace. Perseus turns his in-laws to stone in a family spat. Theseus loses Ariadne, then his own son, tangled in curses. Heracles, his life ends not with triumph, but agony, burned alive by poisoned robes, his mortal half consumed. Even in victory, the stories whisper, greatness comes with a cost. Oddly enough, these myths also carry moral lessons, though wrapped in blood and spectacle. Ancient audiences might have nodded knowingly. Pride leads to downfall, bargains with gods end badly, and no one escapes fate. You picture parents retelling these sagas, hoping their children grasp the warnings beneath the sword fights. And as you drift further, the pattern becomes clearer. The age of cosmic creation has faded, and now it's the age of mortals brushing against gods, shaping legends through sweat, grief, and stubborn courage. You can feel the mythic tempo quickening, pulling you toward even greater tales still to come. 6. Demeter, Persephone, and eternal seasons, the abduction myth and how it explained nature's cycles. You drift forward again, and suddenly the horizon glows with the faint shimmer of sails. Hundreds of them. The age of heroes tightens into a single colossal moment, the Trojan War. This isn't just one story, it's a web of betrayals, love affairs, divine meddling, and blood-soaked glory that refuses to fade. It all begins, oddly enough, with a wedding invitation. You watch as the gods gather for the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. Everyone's here, except Eris, goddess of strife. She crashes the party anyway, tossing down a golden apple marked to the fairest. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claim it. Zeus, wisely ducking out of trouble, tells Paris of Troy, just a mortal prince, to judge. Imagine the pressure. 3 divine women staring you down, promising favors. Hera offers power. Athena offers wisdom and victory. Aphrodite offers the most beautiful woman in the world. You, like Paris, probably don't survive this choice. He picks beauty, and so begins a chain reaction that drags nations into war. That beauty? Helen, already married to Menelaus of Sparta. Paris abducts or seduces her, depending on who tells it. Either way, the Greeks rally 1,000 ships. You picture the beach at Aulis, restless warriors, sails flapping, but no wind to depart. Agamemnon, their leader, angers Artemis, and the goddess demands a human sacrifice, his own daughter, Iphigenia. Scholars still argue whether this was once a ritualized echo of real sacrificial practices or just mythic drama. Either way, the knife falls, the winds rise, and the fleet launches. At Troy's walls, the war stretches 10 years. You stand beside Achilles, the greatest warrior, his armor gleaming like fire, but rage burns hotter than any forge. His quarrel with Agamemnon nearly derails the Greek cause until his beloved Patroclus dons his armor, charging into battle. When Hector of Troy slays Patroclus, Achilles returns, unstoppable, dragging Hector's body behind his chariot in fury. The detail is almost grotesque. For days, he circles Troy's walls, the corpse bouncing in the dust, until the gods intervene. The gods, of course, can't resist taking sides. Hera and Athena root for the Greeks, Aphrodite and Apollo for Troy. It's divine sibling rivalry played out on mortal fields. You almost laugh at how petty it gets. Athena tricks Hector, Apollo rescues Aeneas, Aphrodite whisks Paris out of duels. It's like watching cosmic referees cheat for their favorite teams. But the war doesn't end with Achilles' wrath. It ends with cunning. Enter Odysseus, the schemer, suggesting a giant wooden horse left as a gift. You picture the Trojans dragging it inside, children clambering on it, priests warning against it. Night falls, the hatch opens, and Greek warriors spill out, slaughtering in the dark. Fire consumes Troy. Priam is cut down at his altar. Cassandra screams her prophecies unheard. Aeneas flees to carry on his people's legacy. And Helen, she slips back to Menelaus as if the whole catastrophe was a dramatic detour. The odd, quirky detail. Some versions claim that after all this bloodshed, Helen ended up in Egypt the whole time, a phantom double having caused the war instead. Scholars still argue whether the real Helen story was an attempt to soften her image, or simply an alternative myth. As the smoke rises, you feel the heaviness of endings. But the Trojan War is not just an ending, it's a seed. The Odyssey follows Odysseus on his 10-year nightmare voyage home, battling Cyclopes, sirens, and storms stirred by Poseidon. The Aeneid later will follow Aeneas into Italy, where Rome will claim Trojan blood. The threads reach far beyond Troy's ashes. You linger on this thought. The war was never just about one woman or one city. It was a mythic mirror for an entire culture's obsessions. Honor, vengeance, fate, and the fragile line between human choice and divine interference. And as the echoes of clashing swords fade, you realize the myths are setting the stage for a shift from war and ruin to the quieter, stranger 7, Apollo, Artemis, and radiant duality. Twin gods balancing light, music, hunt, and punishment. The battlefield smoke drifts away, and you step onto a different kind of path. Less crowded, less bloody, but far stranger. The age of long voyages begins, and you find yourself sailing beside Odysseus, the man who could outtalk anyone, who could trick even gods if given the chance. His story is less about conquering others and more about surviving the madness of the world on his way home. You're on his ship, rocking with the waves. His crew is tired, restless, still clinging to the thought of Ithaca. First stop, the land of the lotus eaters. Here, men bite into the fruit and forget everything. Their homes, their families, even their own names. It's a quirky little tale, but you can almost taste the sleepiness in it. Like ancient Greek commentary on being too glued to Netflix or doom scrolling, once you're hooked, good luck leaving. Scholars still argue whether the lotus was a real narcotic plant or just metaphorical, but either way, Odysseus has to drag his crew back to the ships, kicking and screaming. Then comes the Cyclops. You stand in the dark cave with Odysseus as he realizes he and his men are trapped with Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant who snacks on sailors like popcorn. Odysseus, in his brilliance, tells the Cyclops his name is nobody. They blind him with a sharpened stake, and when Polyphemus howls that nobody hurt him, the other Cyclopes shrug and go back to bed. It's both horrifying and oddly comedic. The catch? Polyphemus is Poseidon's son, and the sea god doesn't take kindly to anyone poking out his kid's eye. From here on, Odysseus's voyage is cursed with storms, detours, and endless punishment. The winds themselves get tangled in the story, literally. At Aeolus's island, Odysseus is gifted a bag of winds, neatly tied to speed him home. But his crew, thinking it's treasure, open it while he sleeps. Whoosh! Every gust bursts free, blowing them all the way back where they started. You imagine Odysseus's face in that moment, the ultimate, "Are you kidding me?" expression. The adventures pile on like fever dreams. Circe, the enchantress, who turns his men into pigs until Odysseus resists with divine help. He stays with her a whole year, time slipping away like sand through his fingers. Then the underworld itself, where he meets the shades of Achilles, Agamemnon, and his own mother. Achilles, surprisingly, says he'd rather be a poor farmer alive than a glorious king among the dead. That one fact hits harder than any sword strike. You feel the raw honesty of it. Then, danger comes in duets. First, the sirens, singing so sweetly you'd steer your ship straight onto the rocks just to hear more. Odysseus plugs his crew's ears with wax and has himself tied to the mast. You picture him writhing, begging to be released, his voice drowned out by the wind and waves. Next, Scylla and Charybdis, a six-headed monster on one side, a ship-swallowing whirlpool on the other. He sacrifices some men to Scylla rather than risk everyone in Charybdis's maw. But perhaps the cruelest twist is at the very end. After years of wandering, after storms and monsters and loss, Odysseus washes up on Ithaca's shores at last. His palace, overrun with suitors eating his food, wooing his wife, Penelope. She's kept them at bay with her famous trick, weaving a shroud by day, unraveling it by night. The reunion comes with arrows. Odysseus, disguised, strings his bow and slaughters the suitors. It's brutal, but you almost sigh with relief that at least one Greek hero makes it home. And yet, in some versions, the peace doesn't last. The Odyssey ends with one final reconciliation, but later stories claim Odysseus's wandering spirit never really found rest. Scholars still argue whether his tale was meant as a celebration of cunning or a cautionary reminder that cleverness doesn't spare you from suffering. As the waves settle and the sails finally fold, you feel the transition. The myths are no longer just about war and wrath. They are about the unpredictable sea of existence itself, where you can be blown off course by storms, temptations, or your own crew's stupidity. And somehow, despite it all, you keep rowing toward home. 8. Dionysus and ecstatic chaos. Wine, madness, and how mortals blurred divine boundaries. You leave the salty spray of Odysseus's oar-beaten seas and drift into a softer, more tragic corner of Greek imagination. The stories of Orpheus, Persephone, and the quiet rules of death itself. Here, the volume lowers. The battlefield clashes and stormy roars give way to whispers, to shadows, to the faint pluck of a lyre echoing in a cave. First, Orpheus. You wander with him, lyre in hand, as he charms birds, trees, even stones with his music. He falls in love with Eurydice, only to lose her to a snakebite on their wedding day. You feel that cruel snap of fate. One careless step, one venomous bite, and happiness crumbles. Refusing to accept it, Orpheus descends into the underworld itself. And here comes the quirky detail. Even Hades, Lord of the Dead, and Persephone, Queen of Shadows, are moved to tears by his song. They agree to release Eurydice, but with one condition. He must not look back until they both reach the surface. You know how this ends. The urge is too strong, the silence behind him too unbearable. He glances back, and in that heartbeat, she is gone forever. It's so painfully human you can almost hear the scholars sighing as they argue. Was this story a metaphor for artistic doubt, or just a cruel cosmic prank? Either way, Orpheus's music is left hollow, and eventually, the Maenads, wild followers of Dionysus, tear him apart in frenzy. His lyre, though, is said to become a constellation, a tiny eternal reminder overhead. The scene shifts, and you tread the barren soil of Demeter's grief. Her daughter, Persephone, wanders among flowers, plucking a bloom, when the ground yawns open. Out rides Hades in a chariot of black horses, sweeping her into the underworld. You can feel Demeter's rage and sorrow spread like drought over the land. Crops wither, animals starve, mortals pray desperately. The gods panic. Without harvest, humanity won't survive. Eventually, a compromise is struck. Persephone spends part of the year with her mother, part with her husband below. Thus, The Greeks explained the seasons. And here's your mainstream fact. In ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries, secret religious rites held in honor of Demeter and Persephone, were considered so sacred that revealing them was punishable by death. People believed these ceremonies promised a better fate in the afterlife. Even today, scholars still argue whether they involved some kind of sacred drink, hallucinogenic ritual, or simply symbolic storytelling. Whatever it was, it worked. Millions clung to it across centuries. But step back a little. Orpheus reaching for his love, Demeter waiting for her child, Persephone crossing the threshold each year. It's all about cycles, not endings. Oddly comforting in a way. The Greeks may have filled their skies with gods and their seas with monsters, but they also whispered that death was not absolute. It had rhythm. And perhaps that's why these stories survived not just on temple walls or in Homer's verses, but in the lullabies of farmers, the quiet rituals of women, the prayers murmured before sowing grain. They weren't tales of kings or warriors. They were tales of waiting, of loss, of hope threaded with despair, which, if you think about it, feels far closer to your own sleepless nights than Achilles swinging a spear. So as you walk out of the cool cave of Hades and feel the sunlight again, you notice how mythology has shifted gears. The gods still meddle, but now they deal in absences and promises, in cycles of return and loss. You're left with a bittersweet aftertaste, like honey stirred into black wine. Sweet, but heavy. 9. Epic heroes and tragic mortals. Heracles, Perseus, Achilles, and the high price of glory. You've tasted the bitterness of loss, but now you're drawn towards something stranger, more psychological. Myths of hubris and downfall, the cautionary tales where mortals push too far and the gods smack them back down. Think of these as the don't try this at home episodes of Greek storytelling. You start with Icarus. His father Daedalus, master inventor, crafts wings of feathers and wax so they can escape the labyrinth of Crete. You feel the wax between your fingers, delicate, sticky, fragile. Daedalus warns him, don't fly too high or the sun will melt your wings. But you know how this plays out. Teenagers never listen. Icarus soars, exhilarated, sunlight glittering on his wings, until the wax drips, the feathers scatter, and he falls into the sea. Splash, silence. The Aegean swallows him whole. The odd detail? Ancient sources disagree where exactly he fell, with several tiny islands competing for the dubious honor of being Icarus's grave. Even geography wanted a piece of the myth. From the waves, you step into the prideful halls of Thebes. King Pentheus sneers at Dionysus, refusing to honor the god of wine and ecstasy. He mocks the Bacchic rituals, the ecstatic dances in the woods. But Dionysus, never one to take an insult lightly, lures him into disguise, convincing Pentheus to dress as a woman and spy on the frenzied revelers. Imagine the absurdity, this proud king wobbling in a flowing dress, peeking from the trees. But absurdity quickly turns grotesque. The Maenads, in their divine frenzy, mistake him for a lion and tear him apart piece by piece, his own mother among them. A chilling reminder, mock a god, and you don't just lose, you unravel. Then there's Niobe. She stands proud, boasting of her many children, mocking Leto, mother of just two, Apollo and Artemis. Bad move. The divine twins unleash arrows, striking down Niobe's offspring, one after another. The image of a mother cradling lifeless bodies is haunting. Niobe flees, climbs a mountain, and begs to die. The gods oblige by turning her into stone, but even as rock, she weeps. Scholars still argue whether this tale was more about warning against arrogance or simply explaining why a certain cliffside seemed to cry with trickling water. and you can't skip Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to tumble down each time. Picture him pushing, straining, muttering under his breath, then trudging back down, over and over. It's punishment as theater, designed to make you squirm. Yet there's a peculiar detail. Some Greek thinkers almost admired Sisyphus, seeing in him a strange defiance, a refusal to give up, even against meaningless labor. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greeks didn't just tell these stories at banquets or theaters. They used them in moral education. Children learned the dangers of arrogance through these myths, just as they learned multiplication tables or the names of city-states. You notice a pattern now. Gods and mortals locked in an endless tug-of-war. Whenever mortals step out of line, too proud, too greedy, too mocking, they're crushed. It's almost comical in a dark way. Humans aspire to greatness, only to be whacked like flies. Yet these tales endure because they reflect something universal. You've probably felt that same tug of ambition and the sting of overreaching. No wings melting, no thunderbolts hurled at your head. But still, the lesson lands. And as you drift from story to story, you sense the Greeks smiling slyly at you across time. They knew their gods weren't perfect. They knew mortals weren't saints. But they also knew that somewhere between pride and punishment, ambition and fall, lies the heartbeat of the human experience. The air grows heavier, like the pause before a final act. You've wandered through gods, heroes, lovers, and rebels. Only one step remains: the ending, the slow fading of belief itself. You're almost at the edge of myth, where stories turn into history and gods into memories. 10. Underworld journeys and fading myths. Hades' domain, afterlife tales, and the decline of old gods. The torch you've been carrying through all these myths flickers lower now, as if the stories themselves know they're reaching their twilight. You move slowly, stepping into the shadowy threshold of the underworld. Not the flames and pitchforks version you grew up with, but the Greek vision, muted, gray, subdued. Hades rules here, not a villain, not a tormentor, but a distant administrator. You see him sitting silently with Persephone at his side, her face half warm with spring's memory, half cold with winter's inevitability. The dead shuffle past you. Some whisper regrets, others bow their heads in resignation. The souls of heroes, Achilles, Odysseus, Heracles, linger like echoes. You remember Achilles admitting, "I'd rather be a servant alive than a king among the dead." It's jarring, a warrior so glorious in life, reduced to bitterness in death. Odd detail? The Greeks believed you could actually consult the dead, drawing them up with offerings of milk, honey, and blood. The thought of pouring a libation on the ground and waiting for your grandma to float up for a chat is both eerie and strangely domestic. But the underworld isn't all gloom. Elysium gleams faintly in the distance, a meadow of perpetual spring for the fortunate few. And even stranger, some myths tell of reincarnation, souls drinking from Lethe, the river of forgetfulness before being reborn. Scholars still argue whether this reflects early philosophy creeping into myth, or just a comforting thought that maybe, just maybe, death wasn't final. Climbing out of this shadowy realm, you find yourself in the fading centuries of Greece. The myths are still told, but something shifts. The old gods remain popular in plays and poetry, yet whispers of doubt rise. Philosophy grows louder. Plato, Aristotle, thinkers dissecting the universe with reason instead of myth. You notice how awkward it feels, like a family dinner where one guest insists the stories everyone loves are childish nonsense. Then Rome arrives. The myths don't vanish. They're absorbed, repackaged, retold in Latin, draped in togas instead of chitons. Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, Mars for Ares. It's the same cast with new costumes, like a traveling theater troupe adapting to local accents. Yet something gets lost in translation. The intimacy, the raw humor, the sly wink of Greek myth grows more formal, more polished. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the early centuries AD, Greek mythology wasn't just bedtime storytelling. It was curriculum. Roman schools taught Homer and Hesiod the way modern students tackle Shakespeare or Dickens. The myths were culture, literature, history rolled into one. But eventually, new stories press in. Christianity spreads, bringing its own scriptures, its own gods, its own vision of life and death. The old Olympians don't disappear in a blaze. They slowly fade, retreating into libraries, whispered traditions, and finally into the dusty corners of imagination. You sense it, the long exhale of a world turning a page. And yet, as you stand at this edge, you realize the myths never truly died. You've been living with them all along. Every time you see a logo of Pegasus, every time you use the word tantalize or narcissist, every time you hear the phrase Achilles' heel, the old gods laugh softly. They're still here, hiding in your language, your art, your culture. Oddly enough, you can almost feel them smiling at you now. Maybe Zeus chuckles at your late-night scrolling, or Athena nods approvingly as you learn. Dionysus? He's probably urging you toward another glass of wine. Scholars still argue whether myth is mere fiction or encoded memory of ancient rituals. But to you, walking through these tales tonight, they feel alive. The torch finally dims, its glow soft and golden. You've wandered from chaos to cosmos, titans to Olympians, heroes to underworld shades, and now to silence. The journey has been long, vivid, strange, and maybe a little exhausting, but in that sleep-heavy way that feels comforting. The myths have lulled you into their rhythm, their eternal rise and fall. And as the last ember fades, you're left with the simplest truth. Stories survive not because they're real, but because they're loved. The stories have carried you far tonight, through starlit skies, marble halls, raging seas, and shadowed underworlds. But now the noise settles, the gods retreat to their mountains, and the heroes lay down their arms. You're left in a soft quiet, the kind that feels almost sacred, like standing in a temple long after the prayers have faded. You breathe deeply, letting your chest rise and fall, slower each time. Imagine the mix dissolving like smoke, curling upward, then vanishing into the night air. The thunder of Zeus, the laughter of Dionysus, the steady wisdom of Athena, all growing faint, like voices down a long hallway until they're only echoes. The world around you feels gentler now. The stone pillars of Olympus melt into a warm horizon. The gray meadows of the underworld give way to soft grass beneath your feet. You lie down in that endless field, the sky above painted in twilight blues, a single star winking. Everything is calm, everything is safe. Let your body grow heavy, like an anchor sinking into cool waters. Let your thoughts drift, slower, quieter, softer, until even words fade. The myths have ended, but dreams begin. End of script. Sweet dreams.